There's this really great book called Hitler's American Model. And the people who were part of Nazi Germany were inspired by American slavery and colonization and Jim Crow. Call it white supremacy. It's narcissism. And the only cure for keeping yourself safe from a narcissist is to get away from the narcissist. So I like to first demystify what voting is. It's not like some moral thing, like our ancestors died for the right to vote. People were fighting for equal resources. What we got was integration, and that should let you know that it was going to be problematic from the beginning. White people have only historically been willing to work to advance rights for black people if those white people thought that expanding rights for black people was going to help white people. I don't know if we would respond in the hood the way that I would like us to respond. Before ICE got to Minneapolis, Minnesota, they came to Chicago, and there were Black Hawk helicopters, and black people and Latino people were taken out in the middle of the night, children crying, tears, everybody's zip tied. Where was the hood?
Wait. All right, look, before we get into this podcast, I need to ask y'all to do me a favor. And what I want to ask y'all to do is please subscribe to this channel. Because what I noticed when I looked at my data, the algorithm, and the analytics, one of the things that it's saying is that a lot of people consume my content, but a few of y'all fail to actually join the village. And outside of the support that y'all are showing, which is the sharing, the comments, the viewership, one of the best ways to support us as a village in a classroom setting is also subscribe to this channel. The reason why I'm saying that, because you know YouTube has its own monetization, its own ways for us to build our economy, our village, and our community. And the best way for us to do it is to have subscribers. So one of the things I want to ask that y'all do is not just take notes, not just share with your friends in your community, but also to join ours. And the best way to do that is subscribe to this channel. And I just want to thank y'all in advance for the support that y'all all showing. And hopefully this incentivizes y'all to actually join our community. But now let's get back to the classroom. I got y'all. So now how y'all doing? We have a special guest we invited to the classroom today. It's a woman I met. I did work with her husband, but I finally met her in person when we went to South Africa. And for the first time, I got to actually understand what they mean when they say, like, behind all strong men is even more powerful and stronger woman. And I learned a lot from being in her presence. We do work together now. And I'm glad that she took the time to actually make time to be here today. So this is going to be a conversation with not only you all going to learn, but one in which I'm going to be learning as well. As you can see, I got my notepad ready. But I'm going to give y'all a brief introduction because it's hard to tell everything she's done, right? So she's a graduate of Penn State, an attorney, an activist, an author, a nonprofit leader, the executive director of a racial justice law center at Medgar Evers, the host of the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on SiriusXM Urban View Channel 126, a wife, a mentor, one of the most dynamic speakers in the country, and a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority incorporated. You know you got to emphasize that. If you know, you know. Her ability to translate complex legal concepts into accessible, actionable insight has made her a valuable voice on issues of equity, justice, and empowerment. And with so much going on in the political climate, I felt like not only was it important to have her in the classroom, but most importantly, to bridge that digital divide and generational divide, where we can have certain conversation. We see a lot of rotational opinions on Instagram, but we do need to bring in people that study, that's in that field, to provide us with some form of direction, but also with clarity. So what I want to welcome to the classroom today is Lurie Daniel Favors. Give a round of applause, y'all.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm looking forward to learning from this conversation as well. So thank you for having me.
How you feeling? How was your day so far?
It's been a day. It's been a day. It's been a day where it's very weird to watch the end of civil rights and integration, which are things that I suspected would happen when I was in law school. I've been out of law school a little while now. So to see these things happening in real time, like today, it's been a day. It's been a day.
I want to jump right into it. You mentioned a few things. I'm like, I don't know, I want to get straight there, but I know that's your field. But one of the things I noticed, and it's a conversation that I had even with my niece. I was speaking to you before we put on the cameras. Yeah. She had picture day the other day, and she had an afro out when she woke up. And I was like, oh, I want her to go to school like that. Her mom, everybody like, no. I'm like, all right, so if we do a survey, I said, we do a survey, and everybody say they rather you wear your afro than to go get the braids. Would you wear the afro? She said yes. I go to my mom like, yo, mom, what you like, the afro or the braids? She like braids, even though braids is a natural style for sure. I just wanted the afro. I wanted to see that, right? Yeah. I was on my black empowerment. Everybody in the house voted against me. I felt the way, right? And then I know you wrote a book, right? The Afro State of Mind, Memories of a Nappy-Headed Black Girl. And I want to talk about that. But before I even get there, I want to talk about like your upbringing. Because I told you even before the cameras came on that you one of the first Black women that I spoke to that was born outside of the United States, and you were born in Germany.
Yeah.
And I want to know, being a Black woman navigating like a global context. How did that upbringing shape your understanding of Blackness before you even came to America?
So what was interesting, so my parents met here in Brooklyn, or it might have actually been Queens where they met. They were at church, very, very Christian upbringing. And my dad was in the Army, and he and my mom got married. And like maybe a couple of months after they got married, he got orders to go over to Germany. And so by the time they had me, they were already living in Germany. New York City was always our home base. We just spent a lot of our summers here when we would come back home. This is where we would come home. We also lived on the West Coast for a little while. And then I ended up going back to Germany, and I ended up graduating high school out there. And what has always been very interesting about being a Black American, so my father's Black American, my mother's Black Jamaican, and we are American. Outside of this space, we are Black people in America. And it was very interesting because I remember growing up, immigration was a big issue in Germany, as it is, right now. And if you were a Black African, you were going to have a very different experience than if you were Black American. And what I learned in those moments was that Blackness, one, is not treated universally all across the world. And the American passport, something about being Black American allowed us to, and obviously we were part of the military, so there's that function as well, but it allowed us to escape some of the vitriol and the ridicule that African immigrants or Caribbean immigrants were experiencing. And so it was also interesting because growing up in Germany, one of the things that they are still grappling with is World War II. Hitler, like that's still very much a part of their consciousness. They are of the mindset where, well, at least when I was there growing up, now it's a lot different because white nationalism has really resurged both here and there. And when I was there, if you walking around with a swastika, you could get arrested. Like you weren't allowed to engage in pro-Nazi propaganda and conversation the way you can here. And like they study what they did. They study the harm that they caused because there's a lot of national shame around that. And what's always been interesting about that is that the people who were a part of Nazi Germany, there's this really great book called Hitler's American Model. And the people who were part of Nazi Germany were inspired by American racism because Americans had perfected racism legally to such a degree that it was like, oh, snap. You mean we can have laws that say we're a democracy and still have a completely discriminatory legal framework? And so they were studying the Americans. And so learning about Nazi Germany while being in Germany, while looking at how Nazi Germany was inspired by American slavery and colonization and Jim Crow. And then I was always in love with being Black because my family, like that was really our only option. Like they were always push like Black history on us as much as possible. So I was learning Black American history while living in an international environment, learning American history through the eyes of German people who were still trying to figure out how to heal from the harm that they had inflicted on the planet. So it shapes me greatly because now everything I do is basically figuring out how I can use my privilege, my power, my resources to make the lives of my community better and to grapple with the fact that white nationalism or white narcissism rather, whatever phrase you want to put on it. Some people call it white supremacy. It's nothing supreme about it. It is very narcissistic. Grappling with that has been basically a part of my life's work. And it's what I dedicate myself to this day in all facets. So
and I'm going to get to it, but I want you to explain what's the difference between saying like white narcissism rather than white supremacy.
So narcissists are, there are like 5 main characteristics of being a narcissist. And I'm going to forget some of that. I can look them up if you give me a second. But it's basically having a grandiose sense of yourself, being in a situation where you lack empathy, where you demand constant validation, you demand to be the center of attention, and you are absolutely incapable of seeing how the harm that you cause other people is something that should no longer be continued. And I heard this phenomenal sister, her name, she goes by Ashley the Baroness, a couple months ago, and she talked about the fact that we call it white supremacy. It's narcissism. And the only cure for keeping yourself safe from a narcissist is to get away from the narcissist because they can't apologize. They don't mean, they're not going to be able to do you well. They're always going to be a self-centered, selfish, absorbed individual who demands that you center them. And so when she broke it down, I was like, oh my God, we call it white supremacy. There's nothing supreme about it. I remember reading a scholar who talked about the fact that if you got to constantly declare a thing, it's because you don't really believe the thing. And if you got to constantly declare that you're supreme, and your supremacy is demonstrated by you creating a system where you're the only ones who get to compete. Nobody else can compete. You rig the game so that the only thing you need is whiteness. You're not supreme at anything except cheating. And so I stopped using the phrase white supremacy, and I really began using white narcissism, because it helps us to understand whether you consider that a mental illness or just a diabolical sin of their own creation. That's why I use the phrase, because it to me is a little more appropriate.
And I'm glad you're saying that, because even with this narcissism, a big part of narcissist is like the use of images. You got to reaffirm yourself. So even when I'm thinking about image and media, it make me think about like the Kenneth Clark experiment. I love for you to explain it. But I also want to know, like, how did images play a role in your socialization as a Black woman? And then that journey into owning your identity, wearing your natural hair. I see you come today with your locks, right?
Yeah.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I love for you to elaborate, but before we even get there, because you just mic drop, right? And I need you to
got so many before we get there.
Yeah, before we get there. That's how I get. My bad. My brain got questions. I learn in the midst of it. But you mic drop. You just left us with a ball. You got to put your name on the board.
Put the name on the board. All right. I feel like I have earned a big thing right now.
Absolutely have.
All right. Let's see. Now, y'all don't laugh at my handwriting, because
it's been a long time since we even. We bringing it back. I don't think they even seen the chalkboard like this in class anymore.
That's how we used to get down. All we had was chalkboards.
Before all that, right? Nah, it's a pleasure. So I definitely, if you want me to say it again, right? So when you stated the idea of white narcissism, I'm thinking about the use of images to reaffirm someone in, let's move the mic closer to reaffirm someone in this idea that they supreme, right? Whether that's painting Jesus white, their religious teachings, all the above. But I wanted to know, how did images play a role in your socialization, the Kenneth Clark experiment, and then that journey to owning your identity in your Black hair?
It's so funny that you mentioned religiosity, because that's where I kind of go when I think about images. I used to get in trouble a lot in Sunday school. My dad was a preacher. My mom was a missionary. So we were always at church. And we were Kojic, Church of God in Christ. So always at church. Like, in fact, there's a church up here, the Sexton's Church on Fulton Street, that we used to go to when I was a little kid when we lived in New York. So we was always in church. And I would always ask, like, well, why is Jesus white? That is impossible. There's no way Jesus could have been white. We all know it. Why is Jesus white? And I remember one of my Sunday school teachers telling me, it's not that big a deal. It's fine. God loves all of us. And I was like, well, if it's not that big a deal, why is he white? Like, if it's not that big a deal, why wouldn't he be the color that actually makes sense? And they didn't have a real answer that satisfied me. And that's when I asked a question. I was also drinking Bible quiz champion multiple years in a row. And I was like, so if we were to switch out, I knew the word. Like, don't come for me when it comes to my Bible. I know my Bible. But it was like, if we were to switch all of the images in the stained glass, if we were to switch all the images of Jesus in Sunday school books all across the country, there would be an uproar, an outrage. And that to me made it clear that there is something about the power, about how we look and what images can do for us. And I remember my mom never really let us have white baby dolls. And this was interesting because, being in Germany, you're surrounded by white people. Right. And we were not allowed to have white baby dolls. My uncles, who were, always, like, we had Rastafarians, we had a Sarset, we got Muslims, we had everybody in the family, in my Christian missionary mother and father. And they would always send us these books that had pictures of us and images that looked. So I was reading, like, Stolen Legacy when I was 12. You know what I mean? Like, so it was always about, watching Eyes on the Prize and seeing constant exposure to contradictory images. And that really helped to shape me. And when you talk about Kenneth Clark and his wife, it was actually Kenneth and Mamie Clark. They're both doctors. I say that because a lot of times people say Kenneth Clark, but it was her study. So we gonna make sure they both get their credit. But they had this experiment in the 1940s where they were trying to demonstrate to the court, what is the impact of living in a racist society on Black children? And the reason this question mattered was because at this time we had Jim Crow, segregation, and there was a line called separate but equal. And so long as everything were separate, racism was fully acceptable. This was before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, which is actually about to get. I'm predicting it's about to go the way of the Voting Rights Act. We can talk about that later. But basically, you could be as racist as you want to be. You could keep black people out of your hotels, out of your hospitals, out of your dentist clinic. I mean, there were people in there was another pandemic similar to the one we had in COVID in 1918. And black people would come to the hospital and die at the gates because white people were allowed to say, you can't come in here because you're black. And so Kenneth Clark and Mamie Clark were trying to demonstrate to the court the impact of living in a society like this on the minds of black children, because they were saying several things. Number one, this shit ain't equal. You said I can cuss?
Yes.
Okay. This shit ain't equal. Like, you talking about separate but equal. This shit ain't equal. Like, black kids are having to walk to school 3 miles away while these buses full of white kids that our black parents were paying taxes for were passing by, and the white kids are getting bused to a school that's like 2 blocks away. But the black children were not allowed to attend that school. And so there was a series of legal cases where they were trying to test and prove, okay, you're saying we have Jim Crow. You're saying we have separate but equal. Give us the equal. A lot of people think that we were fighting for integration. People were fighting for equal resources. What we got was integration, and that should let you know that it was going to be problematic from the beginning. But this test was basically where Mamie Clark and Kenneth Clark would place in front of small children between the ages of like 6 and 10 years old, give or take. And they were one white doll and one black doll they would put in front of these children. And they would ask the children, which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the mean doll? Which doll is the smart doll? Which doll is the doll that adults like? Which doll is the doll that people want to play with? Which doll is the pretty doll? And the children, 9 times out of 10, give or take a few, were picking the white doll as a demonstration of what was positive. So intelligence, the doll that people like, the doll that people want to play with, that was the white doll. The dumb doll was the doll that no one wanted to play with. And that was the black doll. And I often will ask people, like, if you played with dolls when you were a little kid, as I did until I took their heads off, and mom was like, this is clearly not going to work. Were your dolls mean? Like, were they smart? Were they dumb? And a doll is an inanimate object. It is going to take on whatever characteristics you place on it. And what those children were saying in the 1940s was that as a result of living in a society where you could see signs that says no niggas, no dogs, no people, like allowed in the store, when they were having to walk past the body of a neighbor who had been lynched, that nobody could take down, because taking that body down meant that your family was going to get a knock at the door and somebody from your family was going to get lynched. What did that do to that child? Because if you're telling me separate but equal can work, then you should be able to pass this test and not indicate that the doll that is the nicer, smarter, better doll is a doll that don't look like you. Well, that test has since been redone. Anderson Cooper from CNN has done it. A young sister by the name of Carrie Davis brought the doll test back in 2007. And this is like in the Barack Obama era. This is like, he's rising to power. He's about to be elected, and black people have accomplished so many things. And yet in 2007, 2010, 2015, 2025, 2026, black children are still picking the white doll as indication of what is intelligence, what is capacity, what is power, what is beauty. And so if a 5-year-old is telling you that the white doll is the smart doll, that 5-year-old has racialized intelligence, and then you ask that child which doll looks like you, they know the black doll looks like them. And you can go on YouTube right now and type in the words doll test, and you will see this. They do it in Italy. They've done it in Latin American countries and Asian countries. And universally, children all across the globe are picking the white doll as the desired trait holder and picking the black doll as the doll that does not carry the traits that are desirable. And so when you think about that imagery, when you think about what that means, by the time our children are in kindergarten, they've already decided, if I don't look like that, my intelligence factor is already sub-zero. And when that's what we're bringing into the classroom, and then you're in an environment where they're banning books on Black history, they're banning our ability to even have conversations about race in the classroom in age-appropriate ways. And then we wonder, ever since we integrated our children into these schools, when we see Black children walking into these buildings where they had to be protected by the armed guard, like little 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, like she had to be protected by the National Guard. We rarely stop to ask ourselves what was happening in the minds of the educators in those buildings that would have made them see our children as any more capable of brilliance and intelligence than the people outside who were throwing bricks and tomatoes at our babies as they were walking inside. The curriculum didn't change, and those curriculums were designed for the white children who descended from the slaveholding class. They were not designed for the Black children who descended from the class of people who were owned. So
you make me want to ask the question. I was trying to save it, but do you believe integration was beneficial for Black people?
Whoo, child. All right, so
might as well get to it.
Let's get into it. There are a variety of ways that a group can integrate into another group. The groups that integrated into whiteness and Americana after after Black people did not have slavery, right? Did not have a multi-century experience of abuse and trauma, and followed by decades of Jim Crow. And so when they integrated as Asian people, for example, they kept their stores, right? They kept their food, they kept their healing modalities, they kept their hospitals, they kept all of their own things, and they selectively integrated. When any other group of people comes to this country, like if you go to Little Russia right now, down in South Brooklyn, in Sheepshead Bay area, you will see stores with Russian language on. They don't need none of your English speaking dollars.
Right.
In fact, they don't want your English speaking dollars. They got it all.
Eastern Parkway, all the
exactly.
Jews, yeah.
And they don't need us in there. They don't want us in there. But my office is at Medgar Evers College. I remember the first time I saw a police car that had CHSP on it. And that stands for Crown Heights Shomron Patrol. It looks just like an NYPD car. But it's basically, they got their own police system. They got their own 911 number. Now, I don't got the number. You ain't gonna have the number. But people have their own number. They've got their own medical systems. And that is what you do when you're integrating as a healthy people. We were integrating with the psychosis of having to survive white narcissism for centuries. And so for a lot of us, when we got an opportunity to integrate, we did so in many ways to fill gaps of inferiority that had been cultivated and nurtured within us as a result of the systems that we were living in. And so when we got an opportunity to integrate, it wasn't just we got to buy ice in their store. Their ice is colder. It's not just that we get to go to their schools are better. Not better because they got the resources from decades of stealing resources from Black people and funneling them into the public good, but better because of whiteness. And when you have not healed from the internalized white narcissism that we as Black people have been forcibly addicted to, and you get access into spaces that were previously closed off to you, there's going to be a different level of willingness to abandon your own institutions, just as a function of how you deal with psychosis and trauma. And you will, in addition to integrating into their spaces, abandon the Black-owned spaces that we had. And so because of how we integrated, I do not feel like integration has been a net good, because look where we at now. 600,000 Black women just got pushed out of jobs. 600,000 some odd Black men just got pushed out of jobs. And we do not have the Black-owned institutions to absorb all of that genius. If you need a job right now, I got money that I could give you and put into a position, but full-time jobs for all the young people, we don't have that. Like, we don't have that. We don't have places that if you're trying to go out and apply and get a job, chances are you're not going to be able to go to a Black-owned institution and fill out a job application to have an interview and come back for callbacks and be taken seriously and get a job that's going to allow you to thrive. Not yet. We're quickly reaching a point where we're going to have no choice but to recreate that. So I think because of the sickness that we were exposed to, the way we integrated was fundamentally flawed and has resulted in us basically being asked out in many ways right now. And I keep asking my audience, think about everything that we as Black people rely on white people to provide for us. And imagine they no longer have to provide it for us. How quickly could we replicate the provision of those services for ourselves? And if the answer is, I don't know, then integration was not a net positive.
So in that case, are you saying like we do need them? Because we don't have the systems to sustain our unemployment. Our food, we don't own the grocery stores. We don't own a whole hospitals, right? Certain things. So we are in a position where we need them to an extent. So like what ought to be the goal, right? Like we hear like W. Du Bois saying integration at the time, right? He didn't know that it was going to be so attracting that the Black elite will actually assimilate, right? He thought that we was going to send a talented 10th and they was going to pull back the resources to the hood. But they went and pulled themselves out the hood, right? So like, how do we then, how does that look amongst our community when it comes to being in the system? But organizing and developing our own?
So one of my good friends, Brother Mike, he always says we have to be doctor and patient at the same time. And we're literally experiencing that right now. And you know, Du Bois, for all, you know, the trauma, or not trauma, all the trouble that his talented 10 theories have created for fourth Blacks. By the end of his life, he had a very different perspective, very similar to Martin Luther King. By the end of Martin Luther King's life, he's saying, I fear I'm integrating my people into a burning house. A couple years prior to that, it's I have a dream, right? That we'll all be able to do all this stuff together. And so part of our challenge is that we often don't follow these thinkers to the end of their thought processes and realize how they have shifted some things. You asked when I first came in, how was it? And I said, it's been a day because we're losing integration. And so we are now in a position where we don't have a choice but to figure out how to do for ourselves. So last week, the Supreme Court destroyed the vote, what was left of the Voting Rights Act.
And I want you to explain that.
Yeah. So the Voting Rights Act. When we're living in, so let's go back, right? So that study that was being done, the Clarks, the Dawes test study, 1940s. That is a time, as I was explaining, of extreme racial discrimination, like complete and total Jim Crow, like absolute, full on. Did you look me in the eye cross-eyed? You're getting lynched. And I'm saying it kind of flippantly, but it literally, a good friend of mine once said that the reason we have so much Southern hospitality is because if you were disrespectful in any way, you could lose your life. Like, and that when you think about it that way, it's like, wow, good point. I know there's other elements to it, but I just thought that really helped to typify what it was that Black people were experiencing. And in that time, do you mind if I back up a little bit?
Yeah.
All right. Slavery.
Voting Rights Act, slavery.
Right.
I want you to break it down.
Right.
We are in the classroom. And a part of the classroom is that we are here to learn. We take notes. I hope the viewers are taking notes because I have a page of notes. So you can't afford to be watching this and not be taking notes. Actually, let's start this. As she get her thoughts together. Whenever you watch this podcast and you tune in to being a part of our community, I want you to think that you're in class, right? Like when you looking at episodes like, I'm tuning in to the classroom to learn from the guest Jordan is bringing on, right? So in this case, I want you to put yourself in that mindset. And the reason why we created this space is because I understood that a lot of students don't go to class, but you are on social media on your phone. So you may not be in class, but you're going to be in class, right? So I need you to get your notes, your papers, because as different guests I bring in lecturers to come speak, there's times where they're going to speak on things that I don't even know. Right. And they're going to reframe it and give us a perspective because we can look at the news and they tend to use certain diction, vernacular with the intent that you don't understand. But I brought someone here that's going to explain it to you in a way in which you from the hood, but you're going to get what we supposed to understand right now. All right. So we're going to get back to her and let her explain. Let's bring it back. I don't know if we're going to 1965. I don't know if we're going before Reconstruction.
We're going a little bit before.
I don't know but I'm going to let you take it from there.
All right. So slavery.
Okay.
Excuse me. Slavery is awful. Slavery is terrible. It's awful. It starts in this country in 1619, but we often forget that the British were late, and slavery had actually started in Spanish and Portuguese-speaking countries around 100 years prior to that. So African people began being transported across the Atlantic as a part of a trafficking exercise in the early 1500s, right? In fact, one of the first enslavement areas was actually southern Florida when the Spanish had colonized the south of Florida. And they were the first to enslave Africans there. And then African people were able to establish some free spaces within there. That's why, in addition to running north, sometimes people in the south ran further south. So slavery's happening. It's terrible. We have a civil war. Civil War is awful. Civil War starts in 1860. Civil War goes from 1860 to 1865. It's terrible. It's awful. Black people were freeing themselves. White people were, and Martin, what's his name? Abraham Lincoln always gets a lot of credit for being the great emancipator. This fool did not emancipate nobody. And I just want to say this real quick. Like, let's say like I'm here with somebody and we married, right? And then we get a divorce. And he take the couch, he take the dog, he take the TV. After divorce is over, I write an Emancipation Proclamation. I declare that is my dog. That is my TV and my couch. The divorce been over. My writing that down and I'm emancipating the dog and the TV and the couch, that don't mean shit because we already divorced. We have separated. That's basically what the Emancipation Proclamation was. You had half the nation that had split away because they wanted the right to own Black people. They did not want to give up their slaves, but not everybody who was a part of it, not all of the slave states separated from the Union. Several of them, like Maryland, some of the higher, I should say the upper north, the least southern of the states stayed a part of the Union. And so he frees the slaves in all the parts that had left the Union, which means he didn't free nobody. But it basically was creating a psychological effect that was saying, no, we actually are going to fight to end enslavement. Black people take off. They start leaving plantations. They had been leaving plantations. Right. They had been fighting and resisting, but now they're able to fight in the war. Right. As a result of Black people fighting in the Civil War, the North wins the Civil War. And we have this period from 1865 to 1877 called Reconstruction. Right. Reconstruction, oh my God.
Yeah, what is Reconstruction?
Chef's kiss. It was like, you know how somebody has been torturing you, beating you down, like at school, and then you whoop their ass, like, and like there's nothing they can do about it, and you like just feeling you ride and hide. That was kind of like Black people. Like Reconstruction, we had all of these amendments passed to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment, which kind of banned slavery unless you've been arrested and convicted of a crime. We'll come back to that. The 14th Amendment, which basically said Black people who prior to the Civil War, you didn't have any. My cell phone had more rights than black people did in the Civil War. You had as many rights as a dog, a cat, a cow, a barn door. Like you were not even considered a human being. The 14th Amendment gets passed during Reconstruction, and black people not all of a sudden are not just human beings, they're citizens. And when you go from being a stateless person who doesn't have any nation that can claim you to being a citizen that carries with it certain rights. They passed the 15th Amendment, which gave black men the right to vote. And I always say that it was men that got the right to vote because apparently back in the day you had to have a penis to vote, and that's what they decided. And that is important because that's where the people who are in positions of power now are trying to take us back to. We'll circle back. So the Reconstruction era, you also had civil rights laws that were being passed. You had all of this amazing. It was the first version of integration. It lasts until 1877. There's a contested presidential election, kind of like the one we just had. The presidential election, people are debating whether or not the Electoral College, like they won the popular vote, they didn't win the Electoral College vote. There's a whole bunch of machinations and shit going on. And white people, both Republicans and Democrats, because at this time, Democrats were pro-slavery, Republicans were pro-freedom. But I say that to say that racism does not know any political boundaries or limitations. You're going to have racist Democrats, you're going to have racist Republicans. And at that point, think of like how we currently think about Democrats being the party of black people, Republicans. It was switched. It was the opposite. But in 1877, everybody at this point is kind of tired of the whole slavery thing. They're like, we fought a whole ass war. Like we ain't got, y'all ain't got your stuff together yet. And they didn't want to help black people. They didn't want to, they had set up all these agencies that were supposed to help transition black people from working their entire lives and never earning money to figuring out how to sit down with the person who used to own you to write out a contract and negotiate for what you're supposed to get paid. With the mindset of an enslaved person and the mindset of a slaver having to meet and make amends. And so it was a devastatingly challenging time. And in 1877, by that point, white people all over the place, like we over it, like y'all figure it out, like we done. My professor in law school, Derek Bell, who's now an ancestor, he has this theory called interest convergence. And that theory basically says white people have only historically been willing to work to advance rights for black people if those white people thought that expanding rights for black people was going to help white people. As soon as white people realized that expanding rights for black people was not going to help white people or was going to take away from their privilege, that's when they stopped helping black people. That's what's happening in 1877. They're like, all right, we fought a war. We ain't doing shit else for y'all. Figure it out. And so the Northern troops that had been a part of the Union, they pull out of the South. That was fatal. Because the only thing, I want you to imagine you're a white man. And as a white man, you own everything. You own the blacks, you own your woman, you own the cow, the pig, you own it all. You don't got to pay nobody for nothing. It is white manistam. It is a white man's dream on steroids. And now I got to treat you like a human? I got to like, you can talk to me any old kind of way when before you talk to me crazy, I could cut your tongue out your face and there was nothing you could do about it. I could poke your eye out of your physical head for being caught with a book, and now I gotta have you go to school with my kids. It was a mind that a narcissist, going back to white narcissism, could not handle it. And when those Northern troops pull out of the South in 1877, white people went crazy with violence. That's when we see the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. That's when we see lynching campaigns take off. That's when we see all of these laws that had got passed. All of a sudden, the Supreme Court's like, oh, yeah, no, you don't have no rights. No, separate but equal. And that's when we see this era known as Jim Crow. And even though we were technically supposed to be equal, they had just fought a civil war, hundreds of thousands of people had died. Jim Crow was a period that was so brutal. And because now I'm as a white person, I'm not buying you as a slave anymore. I'm not investing in you. I'm just going down to the local prison to pick up whatever niggers just got arrested and I'm taking them to my plantation. And that period lasts from 1877 until 1964. 1964, and you have for the entirety of the 1900s, black people are striving. They are doing the best that they can. They are building up towns that were phenomenal, like Black Wall Street and Rosewood and all of these amazing locations where black people were like, you know what? Them white people is crazy. We can do this on our own. And we did it. We created public school systems. We created public healthcare systems. We created towns in the middle of deserts, in the middle of, not deserts, plains, in the middle of the Midwest, in places like Oklahoma and out on all these frontier spaces. And when those Northern troops pulled out and we were exposed to that violence, all of our success was constantly at threat. There's this professor, Caretha Mitchell, who says that our success beckoned white nationalism, beckons the mob. And the more successful we were at doing for ourselves, that's when they start bombing us from the sky. Black Wall Street, they bombed that town with the same military weapons that they had been using in the World War. And so By the time we get to 1964, Black people have been fighting, have been resisting, have been doing everything they can, going to the lunch counters and getting spat on, getting beat up, getting jailed. All of these things are happening. Fannie Lou Hamer is being arrested and tortured, and Black people are just doing everything they can to get free. And in 1964, they were able to get the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That was a piece of legislation passed at the federal level that took blood, sweat, and tears. So when we talk about our ancestors dying, these are the things that they were dying for. And that legislation basically said, look, white people, you can be as racist as you want to be, but you're not going to be able to block Black people from coming to the hotel just because they Black. We can't do that no more. Right. And we can't really do that anymore, mainly because like we've got all these Black people fighting, and we've got all these images now on TV, going back to your question about images, we've got all these images now of firefighters blasting Black children. We've got images of dogs being sicked on Black people who are peacefully marching. We've got pictures and images of churches being blown up that are now being aired all across the world. And the reason that mattered is because America has just come out of World War II by this point and is trying to establish itself as the moral authority. So you've got some major assassinations that take place, and basically enough political pressure is raised so that the 1964 Civil Rights Act is passed. And that is a law that basically says you can't be racist no more when it comes to jobs, when it comes to education, when it comes to hospital access, when it comes to government services. And in 1965, the year after that, we got the Voting Rights Act. Those two pieces of legislation were what was necessary to turn America from being a situation where basically Black people were living like Palestinians live in Gaza right now, and to a space where now we can go to different schools. Now we can interview and get jobs in spaces we couldn't work before. Now we can buy homes, technically, if you weren't redlined, if in communities that you couldn't live in before. And while these rights were amazing and they were wonderful and they allowed for so much advancement, including the advances that did come through integration, they also came along at the same time as this psychosis we're talking about, where we are believing that now we have access to whiteness spaces. That's where true success is. And at that time, that's when you see the abandonment of Black-owned institutions and spaces. I forgot what question I was responding to.
No, because now you was explaining the historical context behind what does it mean now for this Voting Rights Act.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, okay. So the reason the Voting Rights Act is so important, and the reason I said it's been a day, because the Supreme Court just destroyed the Voting Rights Act 62 years later. The reason that was so important was because for the first time, out of all the laws that had been passed, the laws from the Civil War era, from the Reconstruction era, from the Jim Crow era, getting the Voting Rights Act meant for the first time, Black men and women were now able to vote, and the Voting Rights Act gave the government the ability to punish white people who were being racist when it came to the vote. So that difference is what allowed the Civil Rights Act to actually stick. And being able to say, because Black people went from having no representation in Congress to now we got the Congressional Black Caucus with tons of Black people in it. We got the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Asian Caucus. We had mayors and we had sheriffs and we had city council members. And all of this mattered because if I'm living in a town and there is a sheriff's race and the sheriff is the lead cop in the community and determines what policing policy looks like, and that sheriff is an elected position and he's the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, you can't be sheriff and I can't be paying taxes into a town that's going to pay the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan to be standing outside with the people lynching and burning crosses on Black lawns. That's why people were fighting for the right to vote, because in this country, the people who get to make all the decisions are elected. And when you only have racist white narcissists doing the electing, they are going to elect racist white narcissists who are going to then get to decide who's going to get clean water, who's going to get money for school, who's going to get money for hospitals, for roads, for bridges, for housing, for job opportunities. If I'm a racist narcissist and I can ignore your community and only pay attention to the white community and there ain't shit you can do about it, I'm back in white manistan.
And you paying me for it.
And you paying me for it. And last week, this Supreme Court just got rid of the Voting Rights Act provisions, the last remaining provision, because they've been working at getting rid of it since it got passed. And so now my children have fewer rights when it comes to reproduction, their reproductive bodies and autonomy, fewer rights when it comes to voting, fewer rights as Black people than I did, and I'm Gen X, right? So I'm raising a daughter and a son in a world where I'm going to have to teach them, because as a result of what happened last week, if we no longer have the Civil Rights Act being protected by the Voting Rights Act, and the Civil Rights Act is all of this was a part of Project 2025, so they wrote all this shit down. They were so big and bold about it, it did not bother them to put it in a 922-page document called the Project 2025 plan. But they're essentially poised to basically bring back Jim Crow. And what scares the shit out of me about this is that nobody from millennial down, from really Gen X down, we've never lived in Jim Crow. We've never lived in a world where, now, we got racism. We understand racism exists. We get it. We know the cops be copping and we get it. But when you ain't got no options, when they can do whatever the fuck they want, the way their grandparents did, and they've been talking about it at the dinner table ever since the Civil Rights Act got passed. Can't wait. Back in my day, no nigger was ever going to look me in the eye. Back in my day, we'd take them outside and string them up. Well, when you've been fed on that, and your parents were fed on that, and your grandparents lived it and experienced it, and now you're this close to bringing it back, and our community don't even know it's happening, it's been a day. It's been a day.
So even as we having this conversation, you know, the first thing I started thinking about is like the political education. We don't receive this in college.
No.
Right? So I'm thinking like, what was the shift for you? We talked about Germany. We talked about seeing blackness outside of the United States and how it existed. I want to know, when you was in Penn State, when you majored in African American studies, I want to know what did the shift happen? For me, it happened in Syracuse when I was becoming an alpha. My dean was like, Jordan, give me 7 facts on Frederick Douglass. Oof. I didn't know 7 facts on him. He said, you got 7 minutes to find out 7 facts on Frederick Douglass and come back to me. I went and got the 7 facts, came back to him. And that was my first time, I think just in the process of becoming an alpha, that I felt stupid. Like,
wow.
They made me feel dumb on a lot of things. I was like, I don't consume dairy. They was like, but you have butter. I was like, I didn't even think about that. Right. But it was in that time period that it was Syracuse that people asked, like, what radicalized you? And that's what I'm basically asking, right? So Syracuse, that experience radicalized me. I took African American Studies course. That's my first time hearing about like Kwame Ture. Hearing about Patrice Lumumba, hearing about Elaine Locke, and like this idea that we are people of a common condition rather than common consciousness. Right. All these things is happening in Syracuse, even though it's a predominantly white institution. So I want to know, like, what radicalized you? What was your experience in Penn State? And then how did you become Lurie of today? Like, how did
oh man,
what happened? Because there's no way you had to have the straight hair. Did your parents always encourage the afro?
I definitely had a straight. I definitely had a perm.
This process.
I definitely had a perm. I had a Jerry curl. I was, so like I said, Gen X. So I had every curl: the California curl, Wave Nouveau, Hawaiian Silky, Leisure curl. Leisure curl was the best curl. No, between Leisure curl and Hawaiian Silky, because you could blow it straight. I'm just saying, look up the 80s. It was a rough time for black hair in the 80s. It was a very rough time. Follow the drip was a whole thing. But like every other black child, like even though yes, I had parents who taught us a lot. My uncles and aunts would send us all this information. I still wanted straight hair because that's what the pretty girls had. And even though I knew that I had light brown skin, but it wasn't light enough because there were lighter people, right? And so in the psychosis of internalizing white supremacy, when you're 6, 7, and 8 years old, you don't know this stuff. You just know that the pretty girls have that. I ain't got it. And my hair texture, even though you can't really tell that it's light, I have very 4C type hair texture. So I've got this very light skin with this very nappy textured coily hair, big nose and big lips, and trying to figure out what that means, right? And so I wrote it in my book, Afro State of Mind, Memories of a Nappy-Headed Black Girl. I tell this entire story in great detail. So it's embarrassing. But I needed to be honest because I was using my going natural experience as a metaphor for explaining like what happened to black people. And so when you say what radicalized me, 2 things. One, let me back up a little bit. I always loved black people. And I always knew that whatever I was going to be when I grew up, I was going to be doing something to help black people. When I was like 7 or 8 years old, I was like, I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to deliver people's babies and we're going to live in Brooklyn and I'm going to have a building and the people whose babies I deliver, they're going to live in the building and then they're going to take classes and we're going to teach each other. I was basically like trying to create like a co-op. I didn't know what a co-op was then, but that's what I was thinking about. And then I was not really good at math or science. So and this was before Doc McStuffins. I grew up in a time when it was okay for girls to be dumb at math and people just sort of expected it, even though my mom was very strict. If I didn't get an A in math, it was okay, because we still grew up in that era. Shout out to Doc McStuffins. And so when I got to high school, I went to 4 different high schools, had a lot of troubles. Went to 4 different high schools. And the high school I ended up graduating from, because trying to find find myself, and made a lot of dumb choices. Parents, you know the rebellious story. It's what it is. But yes. And in my last high school where I was graduating, and I was always smart. Like I was always, I shouldn't say it that way. Yes, I would fight. And got into fights, not because I wanted to, but because you go to 4 different schools, you're going to get tested, you're going to get tried. Like people, it's going to be a thing.
Yeah. And you light your skin tone, so
and I had a skin, so you better.
Yeah. They gonna test you.
You gotta understand, right? And get it, right? I get it, I get it. But in my last high school, I always had the grade, so I knew I was going to go to college because I knew I was not going to do good in the military. Everybody in my family served in the military. I knew that was not going to work for me because of the way I disagreed with the military fundamentally. I thought it was empire and colonization, and so I knew I was not going to last long in that space. So I knew I had to get money to go to college because we also were broke and we had no money. And in my high school graduation, I was a part of the student body, leadership, government, and we had on kente cloth stoles. I think like 3 out of the 4 of us were black, and so we had on these kente cloth stoles, and they said we couldn't walk with our stoles on. I was like, in the name of Jesus, I rebuke you, Satan, because this is, I'm still very much in my Christian bag at this point. I was like, nothing but the blood of Jesus, I can do all things. So we basically had a standoff, and we held up the graduation until they said we could march, and our friends stood with us. And that was when I first realized, there's power in collective organizing. And when I got to Penn State, I did major in Africana Studies. I knew I was going to go to law school. So I really took the time to study as much as I could about everything I could consume about Black people, everything I could consume. And that's when I learned 95% of the people who were enslaved in the continent or captured in the continent of Africa didn't even come to the United States of America. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's when I learned that slavery had happened throughout the entire Western hemisphere. And Black people had been, that's why you might see somebody in, Brooklyn or the Bronx who look like their name is Jordan or Lurie, their name is Rafael Maria, speaking Spanish. And so it was a phenomenal time.
So where did 95% go? Where did this percentage of people go?
Spanish speaking countries. So Colombia, Venezuela, Portuguese-speaking countries, Brazil. Right now, the largest population of Black people outside the continent of Africa is in Brazil. Colombia, huge enslaved. Mexico, all throughout, everywhere they speak Spanish now. You know how we talk about how Black people in this country are largely racially, if you go back far enough, somebody slave master was violating somebody, and it's we're a blend of blackish, whitish, indigenous. That's the same thing all throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. And 95%, less than 5% of the enslaved Africans who came out of the continent of Africa made their way into being enslaved here in this country. And that just blew my mind. I was like, we have so much more in common with the rest of the world. And one of the challenges at Penn State is that it was, it's in Happy Valley, we were at main campus, and there's a lot of hate groups in Happy Valley. And I was there at a time where we had our first Black quarterback. And for those of you who know football, this was at a time where having a Black quarterback,
I know you did a student protest.
Yeah, we had a ton of student protests, and we were basically being targeted by white nationalist groups that were in Happy Valley who were very upset about the fact that the football team wasn't doing so well. That we ended up dealing with a multi-year long campaign of hate, death threats, and letters. And they ended up actually at one point sending us a letter that said that they had actually killed a brother. They didn't call him that. They said they called him a nigger buck, and they said, but what good is it if nobody even knows about it? And that was a turning point, because at that point we had been negotiating with the university. We had been doing benchmark surveys, looking at other Big Ten institutions to see how come Penn State ain't got no Black faculty, but you in the Big Ten, all these other Big Ten schools, they got tons of Black faculty. How come the Africana Studies department is damn near bankrupt? And you got other, so we were doing all of this work and trying to shift curriculum and increase the environment for Black people. And once they sent that last letter that basically had said that they had killed somebody, we wanted the university to notify the people, to let people know there is an admitted murderer on the loose. You need to go, first of all, find this body. They told us where the body was. They sent out some rent-a-cops, some campus security cops that night to investigate the area. In the rain, in the dark, they shut down the investigation in 3 days. So we took over buildings and we stopped football games. We was that's not going to work. And then, though there had not been a homicide in Center County, Pennsylvania in 20, 30 years, a few days later, they find a body. And it was a Black man. They didn't want, and it wasn't a student, but the letter never said it was a student. They just called him a nigger buck. And that was when it just took off into a whole other direction. By that point, we had been taking over buildings, and it was a whole bunch of stuff. And we had to be escorted out of town by members of the new Black Panther Party. Because we didn't realize how much danger we were in, but our elders did. And there were elders who came from out of town, from out of the country who had been, because this was on CNN, it was on back when BET had news, it was on BET Nightly News, it was like a whole thing, and we ended up having to get escorted out of Penn State, and that was when I guess that was the radicalizing moment, and from then really on, it's all Black everything, because I know too much history, I love my people too much, and we're in too much danger for us to not take this more seriously than we do.
So then, and I think this, like, the intergenerational conversation, I definitely think is needed. Many people may fear and say the community may not understand what's taking place, right? And it's people like myself that come from the hood, some projects, and I'm like, I'll be honest with you, even when we say the removal of the Department of Defense in the southern states during 1877, right, Reconstruction, I'm like, why don't we ever talk about, like, the Second Amendment? Right, for Black people. Why we don't never talk about bearing arms? I believe that now we say, I don't use the term YN, but we have young men that are more willing to use firearms, if you want to say that. Yeah. That, like, if organized, given the right direction, we could create our little military, like how Nelson Mandela was trying to build that prior to going to prison. I want to know, like, why do we not have the conversation about, like, Black militarism, Second Amendment, right? It's like, I firmly believe that if ICE was to come to, like, the projects and try to pull Black people, they will have a hard time. We may not be fully conscious of, like, what the Voting Rights Act means, what the Civil Rights Act means being overturned, Roe v. Wade. But then it's like, nah, but if they came to say, y'all going back to the plantation, this be the first time we can see Bloods, Crips, people that don't get along will come together for a common enemy. So I want to know, like, what's your perspective on that? Like, I don't hear no one ever go, definitely on a political platform, I know we're never going to hear it, but why we don't say, all right, it's time to bear arms? Even during the Civil Rights Movement, they had the Black Armed Guards. They had these groups that was like, we're not going to just march. Right. We're going to have our rifles and shotguns prepared.
So the Deacons for Defense and Justice.
There you go. That's the term. Deacons of Defense. It's a movie too.
Yes.
So y'all can watch it.
You can watch the movie.
Deacons of Defense, you can watch that. But why we don't talk about that?
Fear. Right? And I don't know if we would respond in the hood the way that I would like us to respond. Before ICE got to Minneapolis, Minnesota, they came to Chicago, and there were Black Hawk helicopters sitting above apartment buildings where Black and Latino people lived, and soldiers rappelled down the helicopter. And this is Chicago. This is like earlier this year. This is like January. Time is a flat circle. It's like January. And Black people and Latino people were taken out in the middle of the night, children crying, tears. Everybody zip tied. Where was the hood? Where were the weapons? Where was the defense mechanisms? We ain't see it. I got people that I know that's locked up right now that ain't did it. They locked up. Mumia Abu-Jamal is sitting incarcerated right now for the rest of his life. And so I don't know that we have the presence of mind to use those weapons in ways. And another reason I say that is because you and I walking down some of these streets in the middle of the night, gonna have a very different experience than Jen and Ken. Like, they're not gonna have the same experience. They're gonna be totally fine. And we will not, because even we have understood that there is a different price to pay when you harm whiteness. And so I question, right, how would we show up? Particularly when we don't have the training and the discipline, and we still like to shoot sideways because it's cute, but not dead on, because that's where, you see what I'm saying? So there's that. But I also, now that I'm a mom, right, and I think about, I've had folks who've called into my show who are Second Amendment aficionados. They, and when you don't make your own ammunition, and the people who make the ammunition refuse to sell it to you, and they're only selling it to themselves. And we ain't got enough 3D printers to print that fast. These are questions we have to ask ourselves. These are things we got to consider. If you look internationally right now, this whole situation with Iran, a lot of people thought America was going to be in and done. Right? Iran's like, oh no, we got to fight for real. What is, I read, and I read a lot of international newspapers, and we're just now beginning to see some of those stories reflected here in U.S. papers. CNN and NBC recently did some coverage on this, but not nearly to what international papers are looking at. And there is not, I don't think, a single American military base in the Gulf region that has not been either devastated or put so out of commission that you can't have soldiers there no more. And so saying that to say, being the smaller group with inferior weapons is not necessarily a losing position. But the Iranians are demonstrating what can happen, because for the past 47 years, they have not been able to get access to materials, to resource. They've been under sanctions and blockades from the United States. So they have had to cultivate their own level of genius. And they have been preparing for this moment for decades. Most of us are not in a space of preparation for fighting for liberation while figuring out how to coexist among the people who have been, since their ancestors lost the Civil War, been preparing to bring slavery back.
That's a good point. For various reasons. I think the first one is I never thought about the manufacturing of the bullets. Like you can have the guns, but if they're not selling the ammunition, you definitely can't battle with somebody you don't have the ammunition to battle with, right? Even and then you made me think of this way in which we can learn from other marginalized communities, right? Yeah. Because we always say, I hear some black people, and I used to think the same way with like rage and be like, we shouldn't care about the Palestinian struggle. Where was they during our fight? Like, where they been at for us?
Right.
But we know like the Palestinian Liberation Army did help teach the Black Panthers, I'm assuming, if I'm not right, correct me, to free Ashada Shakur, right? They did teach her.
There was a lot of cross collaboration.
Right. So I'm saying,
lots of education.
How you sat there and you made it a point that like Iran being a country that we may see to be smaller than the United States for sure, which is, but they definitely was preparing. They were right.
Preparing.
So just having the weapons or the rage don't win a battle.
And let's do an assessment, right? Like, I know white families who they're learning how to shoot before they can walk. Right. They're learning how to clean guns, assemble, disassemble weaponry before they can string enough words together to formulate a complete paragraph. So I think when you live in a country where there are more weapons than people, and most of the people who have the weapons don't look like us, while having a weapons-based plan is important, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we make that the primary thrust of our liberation dreams.
Okay. All right.
I ain't saying don't have that thing. I'm just saying,
because I do believe militarization is still important.
Yeah.
But it can't be the tool right now, because as you're saying, for sure, because preparation, even if you for sure.
And what you gonna do with a drone?
Yeah.
What you gonna do against a drone?
Because they dropped the bomb on the MOVE organization. I had learned about that.
That was in the 80s.
I didn't even know that.
I remember that
shit.
That
they actually dropped the bomb. That's state-sanctioned terrorism.
Yes.
We did that in our own country.
In Philly.
I didn't know that.
With a black mayor.
Yeah. So when I learned about that, I was like, oh, all right, we got to know who we fighting against. And that may not be the thing. So.
And can I just also offer this? If there were a way for us to, like, I often think about domestic violence victims, and I often have analogized, as have others, that black people are like the domestic violence victim of this country. And we got to think about what it means to be coexisting with your abuser who has perfected the abuse. And we got to think about what that looks like. And while one could stay and fight, one could also not. And could go live free, maybe somewhere else. Like, I just think there are options that we should consider, but fear from having the conversation often prevents us from having those sorts of discussions in ways that are going to be necessary going forward.
So before I even transition to the next topic of conversation, I do want to make sure I say this, because I used to feel this way. I still feel this way to an extent. I want to know your perspective. Like, this many black people in me, I feel like voting is the tool for liberation. Right, we may not even show up to the polls. Some people, even with like Kamala Harris and Trump, a large percentage of people didn't even show up. Right, and they may have group black people and black men specifically said they're misogynistic, and just the fact that because some of us and some black men, I'm saying us because I'm a black man, but would be like, because she's a woman, like no, we want a woman president. But others was just like, be honest with you, feel like it's a game, right? Both of the sides have their own interests, and they come together to collaborate when it's a mutual interest. And they deploy the same tactics. So what do you say of the black people that feel like voting ain't the tool either? Like, nah, we don't care about voting. We don't want to show up. we feel like we will be more willing to revolt, even though we may not be as prepared. We got the rage. And it's like, I don't want to vote. Like, voting has never helped us. We went to Reconstruction. They took it again. Now they're doing it again. It's like, all right, so when do the fool that keep getting smacked
very valid
say, all right, the hand keeps smacking me. It's time to hurt the person with the hand.
Right. No, very valid. All valid points. And so I like to first demystify what voting is, right? It's not like some moral thing, like our ancestors died for the right to vote. Our ancestors were not dying for the right to vote because they believed in the vote and they wanted a piece of America. They were dying for the right to vote because, again, if the sheriff is an elected position and the only people who get to vote for sheriff are the racists who have done everything they could to block us out of opportunity our entire lives, they can't be the only ones voting for the sheriff. If the person who determines the value of my home, the tax assessor, is an elected position, and the tax assessor and the sheriff are cousins, and both of them are in the Ku Klux Klan, and they was just at the lynching killing my cousin, I gotta be able to vote for somebody else to be in those positions of power. Not because I believe in America, but because you can't be sheriff no more, dog. You the head of the Ku Klux Klan. You lynching Negroes. You can't be sheriff no more. And that was the reason why Black people were trying to vote, because in this country, for better or worse, the people who get to make decisions are elected into those positions. So I always say this: if you have the ability to clean your own water, to purify your own air, to get rid of your own trash and sanitation, to educate your own children, to fly your own airplanes, to mail your own mail, to have your own public transportation, you don't need to vote. You don't need to vote because you got your own community, you got your own situation, you are independent. You need to let the rest of us know how you did that shit, and you need to let us know where you live, because we need to be with you. But if you don't have the capacity to do those things, then the people who determine whether or not your community gonna get clean water or not, those are elected positions. The people who determine if you're gonna have trash picked up or not, elected positions. Whether or not you're going to have books in your classroom, or teachers, or libraries, or hospitals, or healthcare, or any of those things, those are elected positions. And so voting isn't about us claiming moral authority. It's not about, our stake in this country. It's about, dog, I don't want dirty ass water. I want clean water. I don't want to live in trash heaps. I want the shit picked up and taken to where it's got to go, where I ain't got to worry about it. I don't want my kids having to learn just in the backyard. I want them to have a building so when it snow, when it rain, I don't want them exposed to the rats and shit. I want shit. I want things for my people. And in this country, how you get those things is by getting people into office who are going to get them. Politics is just the science of distributing resources. That's all it is. Who gets what, where, how, and why they get it. That is all that politics is. And elections are how we determine who gets to decide the answer to those things. So the answer to the election is who's going to get to decide who gets the water, how you get the water, when you get the water, how much the water costs you. Look at what happened in Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan still ain't got good water. And half of that reason is because the people who were in positions of power switched the water source. And they've been dealing with funky ass water ever since. So if politics is just the science of distributing resources, and we all need resources, if you got another way for us to get the resources, please then tell me so I ain't got to waste time getting out the vote. I spend a lot of time getting people out to vote. If you got another way for us to get those things, I'm down. Like I'm with it. Let a sister know I'm old and tired. I'm Gen X, and Jordan. I'm tired.
I got you. And I'm glad you saying this, because I ain't gonna lie. A lot of people like, yo, Jordan, you want to push me to politics when you well spoken. That's the first thing people want to think. Politics. In my mind, I'm like, yo, I cannot be like. The moment you come to the neighborhood and say I'm a politician, we look at you a certain way. Or rip. But then I look at like leaders like Morris Bishop. New Jew movement. That is a like a political figure. That is politics he's playing though. You know what I mean? Patrice Lumumba is politics. That's political. So I was thinking in my mind, like, I guess I ain't like the American representation of the politics I've seen, right? Because when I look at how politics play Ibrahim Traore, that's politics. At its prime, right? And he's saying everybody got to go. We need ownership of our own resources. That's politics. So when you put that as distribution of resources, I'm like, maybe I could figure out might become. But it requires a lot of re-education of the black community because we don't have a trust.
Yeah.
Right. Like politics in general and politicians. So.
And then you said it earlier, people be lying and acting like your vote is going to change everything. Right. It's and not. Right. Voting is like maybe steps 6, 7, or 8 in a 10 to 15 step process that carries us from recognizing an issue, creating a solution, implementing the solution, and then defending it. But you vote twice a year. Your primary election, which is coming up. Primary election coming up in June. June 23rd is the last day to vote.
Primary election for those
primary election, think of that as the first round of the tournament, right? So you got 2 rounds of every election tournament, and whoever wins the first round gets to go on to the second round. The first round is called the primary. We got a Democratic primary and a Republican primary. So in the Democratic primary, we might all be Democrats. But I think I got something that makes me stand out a little different. And I'm going to advocate for my perspective of what the world should look like, how those resources should get distributed. You're going to do the same thing. And in the primary, you and I, as Democrats, are going against each other. On the other side, the Republicans, they have a primary. They're going against each other. And then whoever wins the primary, in New York City, our primary is in June. Then in November, you have the next round, and that's the general election. And whoever wins that round, that's a round between you and I, we were in the primary. The Republicans were in the primary. Come the general, whoever won between you and I is going to go up against whoever won against the Republican. And in New York, we also have the Working Families Party, which is a third party. Shout out to third parties when they're effective and at the local level, not for presidential. And so the primary election is coming up. But that's 2 days out of the year, primary and general. There are 363 other days of the year where community building has to happen. And one of the challenges that I often face is that as someone who fights to protect voting rights, we sometimes spend so much time talking about voting, we forget to talk about the community building that has to happen in between those 2 days. So are you going to the city council hearings to find out whether or not you're going to get cash bail options or not? Are you going to your community board meetings to find out why they got 3 dispensaries across the street from your baby's school? I ain't mad at a dispensary, but don't be across the street from my baby's school. Like be 2 blocks away so that those of us who want a dispensary know how to get there without having our children exposed to something we don't want them exposed to. Are you attending any of the other sorts of community-based organizations that are doing the work of advocating? Because our community needs to be built, and that requires builders, and those builders do the work of politics every day. And if we make it only about voting, 1, it's a lie. And 2, people get disappointed and disenchanted, and then they like, here you come again talking about the vote. You always talk about voting.
And everybody,
I voted 10 years ago. Ain't shit changed.
I really am. And I'm trying to think like the second part to it. Because even as we talk about politics, being scholars, and I mentioned this earlier, is that there's this like connotation that because you have went to school and you may be a professor in academia, you're broke, right? And that's why many people I've seen, even when I was in college, didn't want to do African American studies. Like my generation, for the most part, we've been taught to just go the route that's going to equate to money. Even some people on podcasts saying, you shouldn't go to college. People that graduate college, they broke. They got to pay that debt. Unless you go in there to be a doctor, a lawyer, something that really requires education, you ought not to obtain it through higher educational tools like college and universities, right? So I want to know, as a woman that has built her own village, like, how has this route been for you as what I'm gonna call a scholar in your realm, becoming like in a place where you economically can sustain, right? Like, talk to me about that, and even like tips to those that may want to be scholars, but you do want to enjoy some stuff.
Being broke is very depressing.
Yeah, it actually prevents you from thinking right.
Yeah.
So, could you talk to me about that?
So I have been very blessed. I will say I have been very, very blessed because my primary focus is to walk out my purpose. I know my purpose is connected to making Black people's lives better. So that has always made my job opportunities and choices very, very easy for me. It's one of the reasons why whenever I have interviewed for jobs, I always interview with a natural hairstyle, because if my hair is an issue for you, I got to know that now, because I can't be worried about squeezing my brilliance through your limited capacity to understand what Black beauty looks like, right? And so I knew that when I was going to major in Africana studies that I was also going to go to law school. And had I not had a plan to go to law school, I would have known that if I'm going to major in Africana studies, I'm going to need either a PhD, I'm going to need something at the graduate level because of the nature of that particular academic track. Similar to if you're going to be a historian, an English major, any of those majors in the humanities. Although the fact that we do not have humanities as much as we used to is part of the reason why Palantir and computer tech bros are taking over the world in very negative ways. That's a conversation we could skip for another day. But for me, I went to NYU for law school. I clerked for a federal judge. And, you read the bio, like I've done the things. I've been in corporate spaces and I've been in, nonprofit spaces. And my degree in Africana Studies has never been more valuable than it is right now. One of the most important things, and I always recommend that, particularly for Black students, whatever you major in, you also need to double major in Africana Studies. If you can't double major, minor in Africana Studies. Yes, it might take you a little more time, but we don't need more doctors, more lawyers, more bankers. We need Black doctors, lawyers, and bankers who are going to understand how to create Black products, financial products, medical products, education products, legal products that are going to benefit us. And if all you're doing is going to school to get a job working for them, it's going to be much more difficult for you to take your education and apply it to the needs of our community. Because I'm very clear about what my purpose is. And I've only been willing to take jobs that would allow me to do that. Even when I worked in corporate America, I was in corporate America because I wanted to
make some cash?
Reappropriate resources. I will say reappropriate resources. I also had a nonprofit at the time that I got to corporate law. And so funding my nonprofit was what I was trying to do.
Interact. And this makes me think of this other question. I'm trying to tie it together. I'm thinking about, because there's times where you're reading and some people may be like, scientific socialism or communism and like anti-capitalism, right? And I used to be like, yeah, capitalism is a problem. But then I'm like, and I read a book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, Chancellor Williams, and he said like, you have to find the good in all systems because there's no one system, at least communism and capitalism, that's itself is going to liberate Black people. That's not going to be true. So my question to you is, like, it's a few of them. All right. So I'm trying to put it together. One is, how did you not lose yourself in economics, right? Like the W. Du Bois, the talented that wanted to go astray. Because when you get money, I ain't gonna lie, your gym change sometimes, right? Food, quality, your living space. And it could be tempting. We act like it is tempting. So how is it to navigate a capitalist system with a sense of identity versus not having an identity, right? And then what is that message to Black people on how do we navigate a capitalist system while being true to our community building?
So I am no longer a broke sister. I'm financially probably in the best position I've ever been in my entire life. And that's significant because there were periods of my life where I lived in shelters, right? So I've been homeless, right? And I am now very much removed from that. And my kids will never know the struggle that I understood growing up. They will just not have that. But the reason I started out talking about my purpose is because it was my purpose that kept me grounded, right? So when I'm working in corporate law spaces and I'm listening to these white people, specifically white lawyers, talk about the fact, like competing with each other in the elevator about who had seen their kids the least amount of time because of how many deals they were closing. I was like, that's a sickness. I don't want nothing to do with that. Like something's wrong with y'all. Like how are you taking pride in not seeing your family, not seeing your people? And I knew that when my parents were working and they weren't home, it was because like they were breaking their backs trying to just make ends meet. While I was navigating my corporate experience, I was always very heavily involved in community-based organizing. So the nonprofit that I had started, that I was talking about, we had started that coming out of the situation at Penn State. And so I was always made sure that outside, that yes, I'm going into Midtown Manhattan. And the first check I ever got, bruh, when I tell you,
what, you got your Louis bag and
no. I was always too broke to feel justified using the amount of a mortgage for a bag. I could not. I wasn't that far removed. Not at all. But I remember the first check I got. This was back when they would wheel the checks around in corporate law. And the brother, because it was a brother who was working the mailroom, he's like, "Here you go." I was like, "Oh, what's this?" Like I had no idea what this shit was. And he said, "That's your pay stub." And then he just gave me a little wink and then he kept it moving. He knew I was in, it was summer associateship. And so I looked and my knees got weak and I had to shut the door. And I called, I remember looking over my shoulder, like trying to see if somebody was watching. And I called my husband and I was like, he was in my boyfriend. I was like, "Baby, we rich, bitch." I was like, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. Had never seen that much money before in my life. Never saw that much money in my life. And I knew it broke my heart because I knew that my parents together had never seen that much money in their life. In one fucking check, all them zeros. And now I look at it, I'm like, oh, you were such a baby lawyer. But it was mind-boggling to me. And I saw, you know how many Freedom School Saturdays we can fund with this shit? I was like, we can buy a house, we can fund the nonprofit. Do you know how many Sankofa circles? These are the community-based circles that we have. It's like, do you know how many Sankofa circles we can provide food for with this? And so for me, those resources it was always about, I knew I was there for a short period of time. I did not want to be law firm partner with any of these people. I didn't want to have anything to do with them long term. I just wanted the resources, I wanted the knowledge, and I wanted to get out. And I surrounded myself with friends and comrades who were doing the work on the outside, who were going to hold me accountable and held me down, and they did. But that was because I had a village before I went into those spaces. That village held me down, because had I gone buck crazy and lost my mind buying bags, this, bag, and the other, I would have been rejected from the community that I had cultivated and that I built and that I loved and that I was a part of. And to me, I was there for Black people. I wasn't there to get a Louis bag. I wasn't there. And that, if you got a Louis bag, no shade, like no offense. But I just could not see spending all this. I knew too much about Black people to be comfortable spending all this money, paying money to white designers who were sourcing their materials from Africa, right? And then I just it wasn't gonna happen. So like now, if I get a bag, it's a Black owned bag. And I wear, most of my garments are made by Black companies to the best of my ability. But it was the village that kept me grounded. It was the village. If you ain't got a village, it's really hard.
Important. Yeah, because I'm around different influences and people with, money now.
Yeah.
And you earning money, and I can see why it can tempt one.
Oh yeah.
To want to live in a luxurious lifestyle, but it is your village, because that's what holds you accountable.
Yeah.
And some of us didn't have a village prior to, so they don't feel accountable to anyone outside of themselves or like their immediate family. So to them, it's like, I need to have a bag and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And
those bags, not for nothing, it feels good. When you coming from lack, like I ain't gonna like, it feels good. Like you get treated different. Like let's keep it 100. Like it results in helping to fill emotional gaps. And it's not just Black people. That's conspicuous consumption. Poor people will often engage,
which is a class thing.
Yeah, that's a class issue. It just so happens our class issues are always wrapped up into race. Right. Yeah.
So then, capitalism. Are you against capitalism, or like what's your stance on this when it comes to systems?
I do not think Black capitalism is going to save us. We are not going to be able to capitalism our way out of this. Capitalism is inherently based on always having a permanent underclass, always having a group of people who can be exploited. And in a capitalist structure, that group of people tends to always be Black people. And having said that, I own multiple properties. Right. Like we drive decent cars. Right. So my kids they do well. And so I'm living in a capitalist world, and I'm trying to think more intently about how to create mutual aid programs, how to use the resources we have to fund other people's shit. Right. How do I take what I've been blessed to have and pour it back into the community? So one of the things that we're going to have to, as a people, figure out is how do we create mutual aid sustainable programs? Because at a certain point, just like how I said, everything else is getting cut off, and resources getting cut off, and we're getting purged out of employment spaces. All of this is temporary, and we are going to have different ways of selling, trading, barter, whatever it's going to be, suing. Alternative ways of generating and capturing our own economic streams of income, so that we are proactively reinvesting them. Because I fully believe your generation, y'all are going to have to be the business owners that your kids and my great grandkids and grandkids are going to be working for, because we are going to have to rebuild Black independent economic structures. And that is going to be, I think, a blend of all of those systems.
And this is a segment in itself, just capitalism and, Black scholarship. But I'm also thinking about, in my mind, like some guilt in a way. And I want to know, have you ever felt that? Like getting a Benz or, like having some of the white man labels, I want to put it in that term, right? Yeah. That does validate you in certain spaces. Like me pulling up in a Benz is going to validate more than me leaving and taking the subway in certain spaces, right?
Yeah.
Or people saying like the watch you wear is also a conversation starter. Or we invested in Tesla, knowing like cobalt comes from the Congo and exploitation of Black. Like that's what I mean by like engaging in the capitalist system, knowing like, damn boy, like I know it come with it. But it's like, do you ever feel guilty gaining some of the luxury that comes with like capitalism, even though you're a Black person fighting for liberation? Yeah. And we understand like we want to develop a pipeline probably to Africa to get cars that's made in Africa, things that suck. Also so like, how does that work in your mind?
So do I feel guilty? I feel in a constant state of evaluation. because I always got to hedge against making sure I'm not being lulled into being more consumption based, more consumer based, more capitalist based than is absolutely necessary. And for most of my career, we were not in this particular position for most of my, like, this is very recent. Like this new, I shouldn't say very recent. It's over the past, I'd say really since I started doing much more media. And, you know, my show is now, we've been 5 years on air on Sirius. That obviously shifts things. But this is recent, right? And so my coming of age, I'm still a poor girl trying to figure out, like, I always say I'm new black money, right? New money black. I'm a new money black. So I don't have like the generational this, that, and the other. But at the same time, I also now have access to spaces that like my parents didn't have access to. I saw this thing about black elitism, and they were like, check off all these boxes if you have these things. And I was like, oh shit, look at that. I got a lot of these things. Didn't realize that. Didn't realize it. So for me, it's really more about, not so much do I feel guilty, because these are things that have sort of come as a result of me spending a lot of time investing in building in community. And so what would make me feel guilty is engaging or indulging in these sorts of things and not doing the community building work. That's where I would feel guilt. So if so now I drive a very nice car. And that car was a tax situation. Like that was a tax strategy. You have to understand how it works. I now have a situation. So and that wasn't, I would not buy that. That's not typically the type of car that I would get. But because there have been a lot of blessings recently. There were different decisions that had to get made. The last day of the year, we were told, you either do this or you're going to owe a hell of a lot of money. So it's like, well, damn. And we had conversations like, we going to be driving around in one of them. You know, we talk shit about people who be driving in one of them. And so it is a conversation. It's a constant debate because it's a state of evaluation, and it's a check yourself, right? Like it's a stay humble. Like stay, because this is all material. Stay humble. Like don't get it twisted. This could be gone in a minute. And if you abandoned your people for this thing, and now this thing is gone, and you ain't got your people because you abandoned them, that's where you should feel shame.
And I think this conversation has been enriching for sure. And I'm just
you about to get a men's? I'm kidding.
No. I would have to move us. I don't know. Like the neighborhood might look at me different or something. Like J.O. is, I don't know. But
do you think
constant state of evaluation, I think, is important. No, I don't. Do I think what?
Studio. I'm trying to take off this jacket and not beat up your studio at the same time.
Do they think what?
Do you? So yes, those conversations would happen. Do you think they would happen more or less? Depending on your connection, your continued connection to the community that you're living in.
I think I read something about like this laundromat owner that was a black man, and he was making a lot of money, but he was always conscious like the car and the things that he shown when he was in a space where people knew him prior to. Because once you see like money and things like that, people automatically think like, oh, it's a responsibility now. It's like you ought not to. All right, even like we think of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, it's like, I probably would have looked at Malcolm X a little different if he had a Benz. Like, if he put him in a Benz truck, I'd have looked at him a little different. Like, I don't know, like, my boy But then for me, I had to understand, like, some form of adapting to the current state because I'm around influencers. I'm understanding how these things play a role in conversations and spaces. But the village thing that you said is what keeps me grounded. Because even as I may obtain more finances and exposure, I'm always want to bring it back. Right? So we got one more question before time runs out, and it's two, right? So I want to close one, then a caller want to call in to ask a question. So my question, I want to know, what message would you give to young black women during a time period where media is exporting more mainstream images of the European standard of beauty? BBLs, lips done, teeth. As a black woman that has taken on her own identity and took ownership in a black beauty as the standard, what would that message be to young black women today?
I would say, no matter how you choose to wear your hair, no matter what you choose to do to your body, just know that for hundreds of thousands of years, black women existed on this planet, thriving, without any indication that we felt that there was something wrong with the texture of our hair. There is nothing in the historical record, nothing in the rock art of our ancient ancestors, nothing in the pyramids, nothing anywhere in the world that should lead us to believe that Black women had issues with our skin, or that Black men, right? Because Black men and Black women failed the doll test. Nothing in the historical record gives us any indication to believe that we had any issues with our hair texture, our body sizes, our skin complexions, until we had to survive slavery and colonization. And when you think about it that way, if what we're debating now is rooted in some way in the influence of slavery and colonization, we should free ourselves from those sorts of traps, from those sorts of conversations, from that sort of indoctrination. And so circling back to your niece with the afro, and the fact that she was willing to say yes, had everyone agreed, shows that somebody in your household, I'm looking at one of them, I'm sure, has been planting some real intentional seeds in that baby's life. That is powerful. Build on that. So maybe not on picture day, right? But maybe when Uncle Jordan comes to take her out, you know, maybe Uncle Jordan, why don't you wear that afro? And then maybe Uncle Jordan gets her extra scoop of ice cream. Or, you know what I mean? I'm not, am I saying bribe your children to love themselves? Yes. Yes, I'm saying bribe the children to love themselves. But you up in her and making her feel enough love that she was willing to say it, that's huge. That is huge. And so I have so many sisters, especially after I put out the book, and I'm actually working on a second edition. Which will be out in 28, because that'll be the 15th year anniversary, because it's been a minute. I have so many older sisters, not older sisters, moms, right? Who will say, I don't know why she thinks she gotta have blonde hair. I don't know why she thinks she gotta have straight hair. And I'm looking at a mom who has multiple color beautiful wigs, lovely wigs. Nothing wrong with a good wig, sis. You like it, I love it. But don't be surprised that your baby can only envision beauty in those ways when the woman who means the most to her or to them is demonstrating beauty in that way. And so I would just ask that we are conscious of what our choices are communicating to younger people, and that we would think about the fact that while we might say we have a preference for straight hair, or we say it's easier, it's more manageable. Yeah, because we live in a society where taking time to do anything cultural, like this gonna take time. Good old, if you cooking up a good soul food dinner, that ain't no fast food, that takes time. Like and we don't live in a society that can that really entertains that. And so I would just really encourage people to think real intently about where our preferences come from. And when we realize that nobody was trying to straighten their hair or lighten their skin or thin out their lips until white people created a structure where there were benefits for doing that thing, that kind of shifts the analysis a little bit. And I would just encourage people to sit in that discomfort and, you know, do some research.
I guess the only response there is Ashe. So we got a question.
So yeah, it's an easy question. Right? A friend of mine today went to jury duty, and they said it was hundreds of white people there, and it was 4 black people. Now I know myself. The first thing I know when I get a jury duty slip is I ignore it. The second thing I do when they send another one and say I have to go is think of an excuse
to not be present.
Right? And not until today did I go, wow, that means that when someone that looks like me go to court, there's no one
who looks like him.
That looks like him. So, I mean, as much as we talk about politics, right? And obviously assembling with individuals that look like us, no one ever speaks about, make sure you're on the jury duty.
That's right.
So I want to ask you, young man, have you been on a jury yet?
I'm one of the people that was making excuses and have not shown up. But not until you say it, I think about like American Skin, the movie. And him putting the prison soldier. I haven't seen it. You know, I'm a journalist, media, studying identity. But American Skin, I ask that y'all watch it. Representation do matter. Even in regards to like your confidence is being on trial to see people that may understand your story, and you may make that assumption because y'all the same skin color. So I believe I look at it different now. So that's 2 things. I look at politics different, but also our role in actually being civically engaged is being part of the jury differently.
Right. And you can't be on the jury if you're not registered to vote, because they draw jurors from the voting rolls. And so, the criminal justice system is unjust. It's racist. And we ain't there to defend our people. Like, so, and they need us.
So we got to do that. And I just, you know, we could go for much longer. A lot of things I could ask. But I want to first say, is there anything else you want to say to them about your community, I guess, where they can find you? And then I'll conclude the lecture for today.
I just first of all, thank you. This was super dope. I enjoyed this conversation. It's nice to be on this side of the mic.
Yeah, for the first, right? Jeez.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm wishing you all the luck, because I know you have a voice that people hear and they listen to, and we need so many more voices like yours out in this space. And I would just really encourage us to think about what your role is individually as a part of this community, right? Well, Sister Katrina, the sister we work with, always has these 3 questions. What are you good at? What problems do you want to solve? And what are you passionate about? And the answer to those 3 questions is basically nuggets of your purpose. And if we could all think about what we're good at, what problems we want to solve, and what we're passionate about, and allow those questions to guide our decision making, we're going to be free. We're going to be free. We're going to thrive. And I just appreciate that you're opening up this space for that sort of conversation.
And I want to thank you for making the time to be in here, because it's definitely one of the first episodes where like I did more of the learning. And you shift my perspective on a few things, which is important. So just like a message to my viewers is it's always important to find somebody that is older than you, that has been in this space that you soon want to occupy, to learn. Because we believe we know a lot, but there's times where conversation with those that are older than you, most times these conversations must happen in person, right? It's not through emails, it's not through DMing. You need to find ways to get in person with some of the people older than you, to learn, because a lot of these conversations is passed down orally, which is part of our tradition. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this lecture. I want to thank Miss Lurie Daniel Favors again for being here. So let's give another round of applause.
Thank you.
And this is a great class, a great lecture, and I look forward to having more enriching conversations. But I want to thank you again for making the time.
I appreciate it. I really do. Thank you.
So that's the class for today. All right, y'all. Good.